So, you're going to write your first full short story using realistic fiction. Now, what is realistic fiction? Realistic fiction are stories that are made up but are about people and events that could actually happen. Sometimes they're called the problem novel, and most of these stories use plots, themes, settings, and characters to reflect the world as we know it. So, for instance, out of these that I have listed here, I used to read The Babysitter's Club, and Christie's Great Idea was the first book, and it was basically this girl, Christie. Where's the tomboy? I think that's her right there. She came up with this great idea to form a club, a group of girls who were all babysitters. And they would go around and they would make money and they would contribute to a fund for the entire group, but they would also keep a portion of their fees as their own earnings. And not only would they then have a part-time job, but they would be helping out the neighborhood families that needed babysitters. Characteristics of realistic fiction. Well, the characters resemble real people. The places that characters live in and visit, which we call the setting, could be real places and should be. The things that happen to the characters can happen in real life. And the problems, conflicts that the characters face are similar to real everyday problems, especially problems that you or I would face. The main problem in the story is the one that helps the reader discover a realistic solution. Now, why is this different from other genres? Well, the characters have normal human powers, so they can't, lift a building, they can't fly, stuff like that. The story may be set in real places, but the story is not based on history, nor does it contain elements of science fiction. So the story you're writing needs to be set in your own time frame, not back in 1932 and not in the future in 2085. Okay? By science fiction, I mean like robots can't come to life and take over the world. Okay? Based on one kid's science project. So, because that would be going into science fiction. Now, I know there's someone who's going to ask this question. What if the character is dreaming or imagining? Well, then it's a different story, because in your dreams or in your imagination, you can basically become and do whatever you want. So, superpowers, dragons, robots taking over, that can all occur in the dream sequence or in, the person's daydream or imaginings. You, as the author, just need to make sure that the reader is aware that this is not reality. This is a character dreaming or imagining it. And I have this picture here in the bottom right to emphasize that. So if you notice, the kids are all wearing regular clothes. Their toys are, wooden swords, paper hats, or a baseball hat. But if you look on the wall, their shadows are portraying what they are imagining to be. So you have, I guess the first guy's military, the second guy might be an explorer, the third guy is a knight in shining armor. And they're going off to do battle with whatever. Alright, the benefits of realistic fiction is that the reader can identify with the characters. The reader is allowed to broaden their interests. And it provides the reader to better cope with various emotions. So, for instance, you have a problem, you don't know how to deal with it, but you find a book that has the same problem, and you read the character and how he or she goes through it, and from that you learn how to deal. What makes a good story? Well, a well-written realistic fiction story is about people, their problems, and their challenges. It's not so abstract that it turns the reader off. The language and actions should therefore be appropriate for the setting of the story. If the story is set in, the countryside, then you shouldn't have gang fights breaking out. because that doesn't typically happen in the countryside. That happens in the city. Um, the language and action should be appropriate for the setting of the story. So someone who lives in a rich neighborhood probably has a decent education, has, we would hope decent parents, and therefore shouldn't be acting like a thug on a street corner. Now, you do have some exceptions to the rules. Bullies, for instance, in a school setting, doesn't matter where they come from. It's the person themselves. There might be an underlying reason as to why they feel the need to bully somebody else. Maybe they're being bullied at home, or maybe, they don't feel like they're living up to the expectations of their parents, so they're taking it out on a kid who's weaker than they are. But typically, you would hope that if you're in a real world situation, a good kid who has good parents and has a good work ethic isn't making trouble. Okay? The story should be reflective of the culture and social class present in the book. So, if your story is present day, you shouldn't be using old slang from like the 1950s. Or, this is New Jersey. Back in the day, there used to be what we call surfing slang, and that was typically out from California. So you don't want someone who goes to the Jersey Shore saying gnarly, because nobody says that anymore. Here's some examples of realistic fiction. We got Cuba 15 and Judy Blume's Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. This one's about finding friends. This one's about family dynamics. And basically, they both deal with relationships, alienation, a sense of belonging. For overcoming fears and accepting responsibilities, yes, it does. This is the movie adaptation, the picture, but it was a book, and the book was called Because of Winn-Dixie. Accomplishing goals in sports. The title's Learning the Game. What's the game? We know it's basketball from the picture. Developing and maturing. Alice, I think. It's a little bit vague, but based on the picture, the swinging legs, I'm assuming it's a child who's becoming a teen and is just going through regular adolescent changes. I didn't read this book, so I'm not exactly sure, but I thought it made for an interesting concept. For racism and loneliness, there's Maniac McGee. Now, Jerry Spinelli, you might recognize the author, very well known, and this book actually won a Newbery Award, so it's very well received by the critics. And nowadays, we even have books geared towards living in a global society. So, for instance, Homeless Bird deals with prejudice, politics, conflicts, and war. And Leaving Fishers is understanding religion and its role in society. Now, for your assignment, I want you to create a short story that could legitimately happen in your neighborhood, your school, while on vacation, but something that's realistic. What's the problem, the conflict, and it could be as simple as trying to get to school on time, or, again, a bully. A person wants to get a job. Anything. And your story is going to relay what steps are necessary to overcome it. How you want the story to be received depends on how you write it. So if you want it to be a funny story, you need to write it to be a funny story. You can't use serious words. You need to have some comedy in it. Setup. So your must-haves. You need to have a title page. And the title page needs to be 1-inch margin. The font and the size can be up to you. It should have a catchy title. It has to have a picture representing the story. Whether you draw it and scan it, or whether you find pictures off the internet, Up to you. But since pretty much all titles, all books that you read at your age have pictures on the cover, you should have a picture on your cover. And of course, the author's name, which would be you. Now, the actual story setup, you need to try to include dialogue. We haven't gone over this, so don't worry. We're going to work more on it next week when you write your second short story. But I want you to try and include it. Images can also be incorporated every once in a while, especially if beginning new chapters. Chapter books do have pictures. So it's fine if you want to incorporate images. It's also fine if you don't. Again, 1-inch margin, but now you have to have specific font. It needs to be size 12 times New Roman, and it needs to be double spaced. Why? Because it helps me with reading it electronically. When you pick fancy fonts and you pick fancy colors, not every person sees well enough to be able to read it. So, and I didn't put it down, but black font color. So these are some examples of what you should do in your writing. Show, don't tell, for example. His head scraped the ceiling instead of saying he was tall. Because he was tall is relative to the person standing next to him. I'm 5'6". If you're 5 feet, I'm tall to you. But someone who is 6 foot tall, I appear short to them. But by you saying his head scraped the ceiling, now we know this person is tall. Focus on important events and exclude irrelevant details. So basically no bed-to-bed stories. And what I mean by a bed-to-bed story is one that tells all the events in a young child's day, or event from rising in the morning until retiring at night, without regard to what might be interesting to an audience. What does that mean? Let's break it down. I do not need to know that the character got out of bed, scratched his head, went to the bathroom, brushed his teeth, put on fresh clothes, and went to school, if the story is about what's happening in school. Alright? If it's about the really random dreams this kid is having, then you can possibly relay, about him waking up or she waking up and falling out of bed and, brushing their teeth and trying to recall the dream and why it's affecting them so weirdly. But other than that, I don't need to know those details, because you would hope that every person gets out of bed, uses the bathroom, brushes their teeth, grooms themselves, and gets dressed to begin their day. Use figurative language, descriptive details, sensory language, which you did in your setting assignment, sensory input, and this will help you make your writing come alive. You also need to develop an individual manner of speaking for each character in your story. None of us talk the same way, so your characters should not talk the same way. Each of them has their own way of relaying information. Like someone might rush through what they're saying, where someone is extremely slow with their speaking. Now, how you emphasize that to the reader is up to you. You can describe the character's speech and then type it out to emphasize it. So for instance, a person who speaks really slow, you might type the word, then do a dash, then type the next word, then do a dash, just to show that there's a lot of pausing in between. Alright. Choosing vivid, specific words to tell your story also helps. Unless you're using it as some type of slang or to emphasize how you might feel, like I felt really bad versus I didn't really care. Avoid general words such as nice, good, bad, went, said, happy, thing, etc. There's a lot more interesting words to use, and if you don't know more words, there's this nifty little tool, at least in Microsoft Word, called the thesaurus. And all you have to do is highlight the word, go into review, and click on thesaurus, and it'll give you a whole bunch of words that are more descriptive than the word you chose. So if you wanted to describe someone who's happy, you could say like they were giddy with joy. If you do a little dance when you get your way, and you want to portray that in a character, then portray it in the character. The teacher picked on Judy to be a team leader. She was so happy she danced up the aisle with excitement. Alright, so anything else? There's a page requirement. You must hit 1,000 words or 4 pages. It basically 1,000 words comes out to 4 pages for an essay writing. Because it's a story, you might format it differently, so you can go over 4 pages, but you definitely shouldn't be under. And that's not including the title page. So when you're writing your story, the whole story with the title page should be minimally 5 pages. Okay? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email. Have a good one.